On the third floor of the old tannery, where sunlight filtered between boards the color of rotting teeth, Oscar Merrow kept his copper stills. They were polished each morning until they gleamed like cauterized wounds, then left to glow in the dusk that gathered when the town clock struck 6. No one visited at that hour except for patients from the neighboring hospice who had been carried there barefooted, fever-browed, by Oscar's 2 mute apprentices. The hospice claimed it lent out the dying so they might breathe the lavender air of the countryside in their final minutes. The staff pretended not to notice the ragged track that led straight to the tannery door, or the faint perfume that clung to bodies wheeled back emptied of more than breath. Oscar believed death tasted different on every tongue. Some expired with the salt of regret, others with the metallic rasp of unfinished anger. He had learned, during the last influenza season, that a final exhalation held not just vapor and secretions, but a sliver of memory. If he cooled that breath through the coiled tubing, the vapor condensed into a trembling dew. And if he mixed that dew with fixatives, resins, and floral absolutes, he could trap the scent of a moment and the sliver of soul it carried. When the compound settled, it produced a fragrance unlike any made from petals or musk, thin, elusive, possessing its own pulse. He named the new line Silencieux. Each bottle was stoppered with black wax embossed with a fractured hourglass. He sold none of them. Instead, he kept the vials in a felt-lined cabinet and listened, for the perfume spoke in voices only he and the apprentices could hear. The whisper floated from glass to ear. Suggestions, commands, invitations. They began kindly. Shave the stubble, wipe the rims of the beakas, tilt the wilted lilies toward the light, but they always spun toward cruelty. Spill acid on the nurse's hands, they murmured. Slice the wings from the moth that hovers near the lamp. On the 37th day, the bottles changed their demand. Bring us someone new. Bring us someone whose lungs still taste of storms. Oscar resisted. He had promised himself that the hospice's condemned were enough, that he would never hasten death. So he corked the cabinet, locked the key in a drawer, and tried filling his mind with the simpler language of jasmine and clary sage. The pleas behind the wood, however, grew louder, forming chords of need that knitted into a single insistence. You must kill for us to live. Each exhalation we contain is fading. Beat us, or we'll shred what remains of your sanity. Enter Clarice Doe, a detective from the outer districts, drawn by the rumor of the tannery that no longer tanned hides, but still smelled unmistakably of skin. She arrived on a wet afternoon in October, wearing a charcoal coat and eyes that measured everything twice. Clarice had once served in the war, and though she never spoke of it, people sensed that she carried a tremor inside that no hand could soothe. She came because 3 patients from the hospice had died without known illness. Their lungs had collapsed as though a frost clamped from within, yet no doctor could explain why. She traced the timing of each death to evenings when the apprentices made their silent visits. The hospice administrator, tight-lipped and furious, gave her Oscar's name. The tannery door opened before Clarice's knuckles struck it. An apprentice, cheeks smudged with oil, motioned her inside. The hallway smelled of spikenard cut with something sour like wilted gardenias soaked in brine. In the distillation chamber, Oscar stood among his stills, in an apron sewn with pockets large enough to hide daggers. The copper was warm beneath violet lamps. Clarice noticed how one of the apprentices hovered near a cabinet, whose lock shone brighter than the rest of the room. Her instinct said, secrets. She introduced herself, voice polite but clipped. I'm told you make fragrances for the dead. I make fragrances from them, Oscar corrected, lips creasing into what might have been a smile. A distinction worth keeping. Clarice circled a still. To distill a scent, you need plant material. I see none. Then you don't know where to look. His fingers tapped the coils. Everything alive is material. Everything dying, more so. The apprentices watched her with identical gray eyes, identical silence. Clarice felt a wind pass across her shoulders, though the windows were closed. A hush followed, softer than dust but bristling with intention. It came from the cabinet. She tilted her head, listening. Was that a voice? A syllable clinging to the throat of the air. Nearer, her skin prickled. "I'll need to inspect your equipment," she said. Oscar bowed. She knew the gesture disguised reluctance. Nevertheless, he guided her through the laboratory, naming chemicals, describing ratios. She took notes, letting her pencil wander toward the cabinet diagrammatically, as though innocently curious about layout. She marked its dimensions, the scratch marks around the keyhole, the tiny black flecks at its base. Charcoal? No wax. When she asked to see inside, Oscar's smile vanished. Proprietary. He glanced at a pendulum clock. And time is no friend of flesh. I have work that can't pause. Clarice observed the quick sweat collecting at his temples, the apprentices leaning slightly forward. She recognized the tension of soldiers about to lunge. She had felt it in trenches when men watched an enemy sapper crawl under wire. She feigned stretching her neck, letting her coat fall open so her sidearm gleamed. The apprentices froze. Oscar uttered a low laugh, snapped a glove onto one hand, and escorted her to the stairs. "Come tomorrow with a warrant if you need to pry," he said, locking the door behind her. She left. But on the street, the hush found her again, this time inside her skull, brushing the tympanum like a moth's wing, and formed words. Soft, urgent. Kill the maker before he kills again. Burn the cabinet. We will thank you. Clarice halted in the drizzle, heart hammering. She scanned for speakers, but the street was empty, except for a stray dog nosing debris. The voice retreated, but an echo lingered, metallic as the taste of fear. That night she returned to her boarding house and laid out the clues. The improbable respirations, the stills, the lockbox humming with imperceptible sound. She cross-referenced the dates of the unknown collapses at the hospice with shipments of chemicals to the tannery. Every line intersected in crimson, Oscar Marrow. Yet the motive eluded her. Money? No one bought his newest perfumes. Passion? Yes, but passion for what? At midnight she woke, convulsing, from a dream of glass vials circling her throat like a collar. The vials breathed. They heated, they whispered, "We need new lung. Yours. Give them, or give us, his." When she sat up, her room reeked faintly of vetiver over charnel dirt. She checked the window latch, closed. The odor remained. Across town, Oscar paced before the cabinet, wavering between defiance and submission. He had not wanted murder. He told the bottles so. He reminded them of his oath to harvest only the already dying. But the whispers had upgraded to screams. The wax seals vibrated. A hairline crack snaked across one vial, allowing a smoke-thin leak of fragrance that smelled of cold iron trimmed with sugar. The soul fragment inside, an old man who had perished telling his estranged son forgive, was unraveling. Oscar pressed his ear to the glass and heard the fragment weep. Another hour and it would be gone. Essence without anchor. A ghostly gas that would drift through the laboratory and vanish. He loved them, those voices. They were his children in a way his own body could never provide. He could not let them die. Yet he balked at the prospect of wetting his own hands in blood. The apprentices, however, owed him everything. That he had rescued them from gutters during the famine, that he had taught them to read formulas and compose accords. They would do what he could not. All he need do was speak the order. He lifted the key. While he deliberated, Clarice met with Father Verlaine, a priest who served last rites at the hospice. She told him about the tannery. He nodded grimly. The boys wheeled the bodies back stiffer than when I left the room moments earlier, as if death accelerated outside the chapel door. He hesitated. And I hear them at night. Breaths. They move through the corridors after all lamps are doused. Someone inhales where no lamps exist. Clarice shivered. I may need church help. Verlaine clasped her shoulder. God's arm is long, detective, but mortal arms are quicker. They agreed on dawn for an unofficial search, warrant or no. Dawn never came quietly. Thunder cracked at 4, bringing torrential rain that bruised the roofs. Oscar took the storm as omen, water to wash away guilt. He unlocked the cabinet. The surge of voices nearly split his eardrums. A choir of amputated throats. They clamored for vitality direction. He told them about Clarice, her sharp glance, her suspicion. Will she do? They asked. If she dies, who will suspect you? Indeed, her disappearance could be blamed on war trauma. Many veterans wandered into rivers each year. The bottles hissed approval. Oscar kissed the wax of each lid, tasted resin and grief, and whispered to the apprentices, "Bring her tonight." Clarice, meanwhile, approached the magistrate for a search order. Bureaucracy creaked. Forms required signatures from officials at breakfast. She fidgeted, knowing that delay cost lives. Eventually, an undersecretary approved a discretionary entry once evidence grew overwhelming. She tucked the document inside her coat. She reached the tannery by sunset, Verlaine beside her, the priest's cassock flapping like a wounded raven. Neither saw the apprentices in the alley, shadows melded with rusted barrels. Clarice tried the door. It opened without protest. Too easy, she thought. Inside, the laboratory lamps burned low, still steamed. A paler haze than usual clung to the rafters, as though the perfumes exhaled in anticipation. They advanced. Clarice unholstered her revolver. Father Verlaine produced a small vessel of holy water and a wooden mallet, the hammer for sealing crypts. His presence emboldened her until she noticed the floor. A circle of chalk encircled the stills, threaded with sigils shaped like inverted lungs. The chalk gleamed wetly, freshly drawn. A ritual, she guessed. Or perhaps a cage. From the cabinet leaked a single sustained note, similar to a violin played on one string, sorrow drawn to the agony of sparkle. Clarice's hand shook with desire to open the door and comfort the source. Father Verlaine sensed her sway. He grasped her elbow. "Stay, detective. The nearer you step, the sweeter the music grows." "Music," she echoed. "Yes, I hear it. And you can smell lilies?" He inhaled. "The lilies cover my nose." Clarice smelled lilies too, though none were in sight. She fought the lure. "We break the lock," she said. "Confiscate evidence." The priest nodded, then hesitated. "What if the evidence fights back?" "We'll be ready." She approached the cabinet. The timber vibrated. The key left in the latch twitched like a compass spinning. She removed it, pocketed it, and lifted her revolver butt to strike the hinge. The apprentices struck first. They lunged from behind curtains, garroots glinting. One looped wire around Clarice's throat. The other seized the priest, jamming smothering cloth over his mouth. Clarice dropped her weapon. Stars burst behind her eyes as the wire compressed her windpipe. She jabbed an elbow backward, catching ribs. The apprentice grunted but held fast. Spots bloomed black. Breath failing. Breath. They wanted breath. In that narrowing tunnel of consciousness, she heard the cabinet's voice swelling. "We can help. Break us open. Let us out and we'll stop them." Clarice kicked the cabinet, splintering a lower panel. A vial toppled, shattering. Fragrance erupted, warm as midsummer barns, sharp as winter steel. The apprentice holding her shrieked, releasing the wire to claw his ears. Something invisible spiraled from the broken glass and pierced his skull. He collapsed, eyes reeling, lips mouthing last prayers that weren't his. Clarice sucked air mixed with aroma. The vapor curled inside her lungs, but rather than strangling, it steadied her pulse. She felt borrowed courage, the soul of a nurse who had died saving children from a burning ward. The nurse whispered, "Push forward. For them." With renewed strength, Clarice spun, delivering a heel to the second apprentice's knee. He faltered. The priest wrenched free, sloshing holy water straight into the youth's eyes. Steam rose as if acid bit flesh. The apprentice screamed and retreated, tripping over hoses, knocking another vial loose. That too shattered. This scent roared like a forge. It filled the room with heat that seemed to melt nails. The second soul fragment, once a blacksmith who'd murdered his rival before hanging himself, shot into the apprentice's nostrils. His scream cut midair. He went rigid, then limp. Father Verlaine crossed himself, voice quivering. Merciful God, what is trapped there? People, Clarice coughed. Pieces of them. Oscar emerged from the stairwell, pistol aimed. Stop, he commanded, though his hand shook. Don't break another vial. They're fragile. Clarice stepped between him and the cabinet. They're prisoners. They're family, he countered. You've heard them. They desire only life. Life purchased by murder? What is murder to something already dying? I finish what fate begins. He gestured toward the apprentices, sprawled unconscious. I never asked them to kill. They volunteered to preserve the choir. Clarice felt the nurse's courage swirling inside, colliding with her own anger. The choir manipulates you. She took a cautious step. They fear extinction. They'll promise anything. Oscar trembled. They saved me from loneliness. They're devouring you, Father Verlaine said softly. A slow crucifixion of the mind. Oscar's eyes brimmed. For a moment, Clarice believed he might lower the gun. Then a single whisper slithered between them. Kill her. He squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the cabinet door, ricocheted, and sliced through a shelf of vials. Ass exploded. Scents cascaded. Forest after rain. Coal smoke and snow. The breath of a newborn discovering light. Each pistoling aroma coalesced into a cyclone of translucent faces. Some wept, some roared, some smiled with teeth sharpened by bitterness. The room filled with a hurricane of lost breath. Clarice dove behind us still, dragging the priest. Oscar stood transfixed, gun forgotten. The souls confronted their maker. You kept us bound. You starved us. You promised new lungs and gave only dust. Now feed us yourself. They surged. Misty tendrils invaded his nostrils, mouth, ears. Oscar gagged, clutching throat as if swallowing knives. His skin mottled. The souls burrowed deeper, scouring veins, pushing red to surface until he looked tattooed with lightning. He fell, convulsing. The peppermint scent of terror flooded the room. Clarice shielded her face. Father, can you contain them? He fumbled the holy water. It was half empty. Spirits crave matter. We must give them none. How? She scanned the wreckage. Alcohol vats, copper stills, flames beneath. A plant struck like matchhead. She seized Oscar's dropped pistol, shot the nearest valve. Ethanol gushed, soaking the floor. Another shot to the pilot light. Fire leapt, hungry, blue at its core. Ether and perfume ignited simultaneously, roaring upward. Heat chased wind that chased spirits, smoke joined. The fragrances, seeking shape, clung to oxygen, but fire devoured that too. The faces blurred, melted into ribbons of vapor consumed by combustion. Out! Auli shouted. She and Verlaine hauled the apprentices still breathing toward the exit. Behind them, copper popped like timpani, glass shattered, timber shrieked. Rain outside hissed at the flames bursting through windows, but inside the inferno carved sanctum for no one. They dragged the apprentices across cobblestones before, building timbers collapsed inward with a sigh. Soot clouded the storm. Clarice coughed black phlegm, eyes watering. She looked at the apprentices boys, no older than 19. They would wake to find their voices returned, if not their innocence. Father Verlaine murmured a prayer for Oscar. No body emerged from the blaze. Days later, investigators sifted through ruins. They found twisted copper, charred stoppers, rivulets of hardened wax. Nothing that resembled a vial survived uncracked. No scent lingered except wet ash. Clarice sat in the hospice garden, bandaged throat hidden beneath a silk scarf. The head nurse thanked her. Unexplained deaths had ceased. Clarice accepted the gratitude with half a smile. Then she inhaled gently. Air smelled of wet soil and marigolds, nothing more. Yet, deep in her lungs, She recognized a lingering note, perhaps imagination, perhaps not, the nurse's courage that had ridden her breath. She wondered if fragments could embed in living tissue, like pollen lodged in alveoli. Several nights later, a package arrived at her boarding house. Oscar's formula book, edges singed but legible, rescued from the fire by an unknown hand. Inside was a single intact page, titled Reclamation of Final Exhalations. At the bottom, Oscar had written in spidery ink, "They are never fully gone. They wait wherever breath still bends." Clarice closed the book and locked it inside the police archive, beneath barbed light and heavier locks than any cabinets. Even so, when the corridor emptied, she could swear she smelled lilies blooming in the dank and heard, far off, a whisper practicing the shape of her name.